Okay, good afternoon. I'm Usman Abbasi. I'm the Director of Mobile Engineering at PayPal. This session is about how you overcome the challenges of cross-platform development in mobile specifically. We've gathered a set of guests over here that are actually work on products that are also cross-platform. They're doing cool things in mobile, and we'd like to kind of share our insights with you about what the mobile landscape looks like today and where we see it going. This is going to be a little bit different than I think what you've been getting in these other sessions. With we're not going to be talking about how PayPal can help you monetize. I mean, you've been getting a lot of that across your different sessions. There's you can find out about PayPal libraries and the APIs. This is about PayPal. We're developers too. We're looking at this landscape just like you guys. We're looking at where the trends are going. How's iPhone evolving, Android, mobile web. We're having to navigate the same stuff, and we're here to kind of share our learnings of the way that we're seeing it. We have a couple of folks from a couple of different companies. We have Adam Nash, who's the VP of Platform, Mobile, and Search at LinkedIn. Adam. And we have Scott Atwood, who's a lead on our client team at PayPal. So he's looking at all of our P2P consumer applications. So if you see our iPhone application, Android, BlackBerry, he's leading that team up. And we have Han, who's Director of Engineering for mobile at eBay. And a lot of the cool stuff that eBay's putting out there, he's doing the development for. So basically, the way that's going to work, I'm going to basically give a survey of what we're seeing here at PayPal and kind of how we're doing it. I'll toss out some questions to the panel, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So that's going to be the agenda for today. So the backdrop, right? I think we all know it. The technology is moving super fast. There's lots of innovation. I mean, if you look at even like the platforms that were around 3 years ago, most of them are dead or dying. And then there's a whole new set of platforms: iPhone, Android, Windows Mobile just came out this month, and WebOS. There's a ton of innovation continuing to happen in the space, and it's still something that the space hasn't been won. I mean, iPhone's doing fantastic, and we know that, but still there's just a ton of change happening all the time, and we got to deal with it, right? Fragmentation. I mean, we've been talking about on the mobile in mobile forever. It was a problem 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and it continues to be a problem today. How do you deal with that? And finally, we're continuing to be in uncharted territory, right? I mean, things are continuing to change. We don't know where things are going. Google, Apple continue to fight, and HP is not a small player. BlackBerry's still there. Microsoft has deep pockets. I mean, how's this stuff going to evolve? We're continuing to see, and we're getting to actually be the beneficiaries of all the competition that's happening. So that's our backdrop. What are we doing in PayPal? Kind of just a quick survey of the products that we're doing. We're looking at not only our consumer application, we're doing native development on iPhone, Android, BlackBerry, Symbian. We're going to be looking at the new platforms going forward. You're basically giving the functionality that you get on the website, you can get on the native application. We just introduced the 3.0 functionality with local that was announced yesterday. Merchant checkout. This is bringing that great checkout experience that you've come to see on the web. We're bringing it to the mobile phone. You see PayPal. You can buy with PayPal. We're bringing a great mobile web experience to the mobile phone. This is all the things from one-click payments across different merchants, a single integration. So you don't, as a merchant, you don't need to reintegrate to do mobile. Your current integration works. It just works. Guest payments, so that you can start taking credit cards, auto-detect mobile web, so that we can detect that whether or not you're coming in off of a desktop or off of an iPhone or some other mobile browser. We also have an SDK, so that if you're building an application, you can start embedding mobile payments into your application. So those are things we've had the sessions. I'm sure that if you have an opportunity to go to them, I'll be here to answer any questions. But these are the things that we have. So like I said, we have a pretty broad look at the mobile ecosystem. The other thing to keep in mind is because we're big and we're global, we have to be thinking about not just what's happening here, at looking at the trends that are happening here in like Silicon Valley or even North America, but we're looking at the trends that are going on worldwide. So you can look. The blue is actually where you find PayPal's localized. So you can get your language support, currency, full currency support, money, funds in, funds out. You get the whole thing, and you can see we have pretty good coverage across the world. We have more coverage actually than any other competitor. You can look at what we have. I guess it's showing up as kind of tan or brownish. You get send, receive, withdraw functionality. So again, pretty good coverage. And then there's like for majority of the rest of the world, you get send only. You can send money, but not receive or withdraw money. So we have to look at all of the places where PayPal can be used. Is like, what is the most appropriate technology? Emerging markets is actually one of the kind of the fascinating places where mobile payments is really taking off. And if you look at M-Pesa, which is a great mobile payment success story in Kenya, they're not using the iPhone, they're not using the Android, they're not using any of these smartphone technologies, they're using SMS, right? And so you have to be kind of aware of like where you are. If you look at Europe, it's not iPhone or Android that's leading over there, it's Symbian, it's Nokia. And Android is doing great, but still, iPhone's still lagging a little bit behind. So it really comes down to where you're targeting. That's something that you have to keep in mind. If you're looking for a global impact, the technology that you use is going to be based on like what the local market allows. Do you have a data plan? What are the type of phones that the local population is using? So the way that we're looking at iPhone, and this is legal, got a hold of this slide and actually took out my cool little Apple icon. So there used to be a little Apple up at the top left-hand corner. But we see this as our flagship platform. This is where we do all of our early innovation. All of the new features actually come out on iPhone first. We found that basically PayPal is a C++ company, right? We do all of our development in C++. We have a large number of C++ developers. And they've actually found the transition over to Objective-C is actually not that bad. They're already used to dealing with memory management. They know all of this kind of the standard stuff. The syntax is very close to C. It's not exactly the same. Mac developers clearly have a distinct advantage with Objective-C. So we've actually been able to train up some of our back-end C++ developers over to start doing some iPhone development, and they got trained up in about a week. I mean, it was like, just really kind of, it didn't take them very long at all. It is a walled garden. Now, actually, you can hear the kind of the good and the bad, and you can kind of look at it different ways. From our perspective, it's a protected, uniform platform, and because we are a financial services company and we do take security seriously, that protection that Apple, the App Store and App Store vetting gives us, actually makes us feel a little bit better, especially when we're doing our SDK and we're putting out like, hey, you can start taking PayPal payments in your application. Having that extra level of scrutiny that Apple provides is actually makes us feel a little bit better. The bad, of course, is there's a downside. Everything goes through their terms of service, and you have to kind of always figure out, we put out an application, is it going to satisfy the Apple gatekeepers? We're always kind of having to negotiate, like, hey, are we pushing the envelope here? And that's always kind of the challenge, and I'm sure that our guests can also speak to that as well. You got to see the Android icon. So Android, that's what the opposite side would have looked like if I would have been allowed to do Android. So I guess Android is a little bit more open that I'm able to use that icon. So given the trends of where we're seeing this going, it's not going to surprise me that we actually start doing most of our early innovation on Android by next year. So just where handset sales are going, and even the traction that we're seeing, Android is just growing like gangbusters. So we're working feverishly to kind of make sure that the two platforms are at parity, but we're expecting that probably by the end of 2011, Android will become our flagship platform. No surprise here, it is easier for Java developers. It's a Java platform, so if you know Java, you just got to understand the SDK, kind of clear cut, nothing, no surprise. Fragmentation is a problem. So you talked to us about testing and how we have to test across different devices. It's a pain. And it's only going to get worse. You're going to start seeing lower powered phones, lower CPU phones coming out. So you're going to have not only deal with different dimensions of screen sizes, different powers of CPU, to all your high-end top-of-line CPUs, and so tablets coming out. So all sorts of issues with fragmentation. It's a problem, and we have to kind of work through it if we want to be on this platform. It is an open platform. I put it in quotes. It's a controversial statement how open it is. I mean, I don't know if you've been following kind of the threads going back and forth about, is Android open, is it not? It's an interesting conversation, a little bit maybe theoretical and academic to some, but it is, I mean, you can at least get access to the source code. It is flexible and adaptable. I think they did a good job on architecting. There's a lot of things that you can do that we're fully expecting that we're going to be using to provide payment services on that platform. The bad, we're a financial services company. We take security seriously. We're still trying to get a handle on the security model. It's continuing to change, and we're trying to make sure that we stay ahead of it. But it's something that we're continuing to look at. Next is the mobile web, right? And mobile web helps with, we are a web company. At the end of the day, PayPal is a web company, and we have a lot of expertise in the web. We continue to be big believers in the web. So mobile web is going to be a continuing place where we continue to look at. Mobile web helps us with portability. And it can actually kind of deal with some of the fragmentation issues if you kind of get some of this stuff right. Rendering technology, which is something that we're looking at PayPal, is a company called NetBiscuit, and something that eBay also uses, actually helps with fragmentation. So you can actually look at different, it'll actually degrade based on what type of device it is and make sure that the page renders consistently across different devices. WebKit, I mean, was really the thing that kind of like changed the whole ball game with the mobile web, right? I mean, iPhone came out and it just did mobile web so much better than anything you'd ever seen before. And the reason that they were able to do that is because of the WebKit rendering engine underneath. It's been adopted by Android. It's adopted by Nokia. BlackBerry just came out with the Torch that's using it. So, I mean, this has really kind of paved the way. One of the things we've discovered is that despite WebKit being fantastic and all, but there's still inconsistencies between the different WebKit implementation that still require the rendering technology to deal with the differences. And HTML5. Now, this is something that we haven't really kind of done fully on our side yet at PayPal, something we'll continue to look at, but we do think that this will help kind of close the gap, that experience gap that you have between web and native applications. And I think HTML5 may not completely close the gap, but it certainly brings it a long way closer. So anyway, this is a survey. This is kind of the way that we're looking at it at PayPal. I'd love for it to kind of open up the floor to our guests. First, I guess, Adam, why don't you talk about the stuff that you're doing with over at LinkedIn?
Happy to. Just to get a quick read on the audience, how many of the people here are on LinkedIn, have a LinkedIn profile? Oh, that's good. All right. So who's more iPhone? The audience. Who's Android more? You guys can fight later. BlackBerry? All right, there's a few. So for us, those are the three big platforms for us right now. We see heavy adoption amongst professionals. LinkedIn is the world's largest professional network. We're in over 150 countries. We see pretty broad adoption worldwide, largely because professionals, it's a global phenomenon. For us, mobile is huge for two simple reasons. One is professionals tend to skew towards higher income. So they tend to actually buy into the latest devices more than the average population. And the second is, as you guys probably know, most professionals are rarely at their desks. And so actually mobile technology is immensely important to them. Our strategy around this is simple. We have a range of first-class clients that we build for the smartphones that we see professionals using. There's new technologies all the time. And so when we see them start building in the metrics, we start building applications for them. And then also we've opened up our development platform so that any business application online, whether it's a mobile web application or native application, can integrate LinkedIn services into that application. So that's the way we look at the world. Obviously for us, mobile was actually a labor of love for a long time. We began this year by launching our first really what I'd consider world-class iPhone client application with LinkedIn 3.0 for the iPhone. That's been immensely successful this year. We launched our first BlackBerry client earlier this year. Android is coming. I'm not allowed to say more, but it's coming. But that kind of reflects the adoption that we saw for native applications and mobile devices in our own metrics.
Okay. About Han, do you want to talk about the stuff that you guys are doing?
Sure. So I work for eBay. eBay currently is moving, we're on track to move about $1.5 billion worth of merchandise on mobile. We sell, I would say, one item every second. And on any given month, we move 2 or 3 Ferraris. So people are definitely using mobile to buy items. For eBay, we have a presence on the mobile web around the globe, as well as on the iPhone, the Android, the iPad. And we are looking at some of the lesser platforms in Badu, Migo, etc. On the iPhone in particular, we have a vertical strategy. So not only do we have the main app, we also have various vertical apps, including selling, deals, and the fashion app as well. So we've learned quite a number of things over the last year or so. Mobile is one of the fastest growing divisions at eBay. We are doing anywhere between 1 to 5% week over week growth from a revenue perspective. So it is definitely growing at an astronomical rate.
Han, do you want to talk about some of the platforms that you're targeting right now? Like, what are the platforms that you're on, and what are you kind of seeing yourself going forward?
Well, from an academic perspective, I would argue that I'm on all the platforms because I do have a mobile web presence built on the NetBiscuits platform, which allows me theoretically to degrade my presence down to 6.5 million web browser OS combinations. On the mobile web, I see from a device profile perspective, I see about 1,200 unique devices hit my website every month. And in order for somebody to transact on my website, they need to be able to trust the website. It needs to look correct. So we solve that problem on our mobile website. If I take a look at the top 20 devices on my mobile website, that would only represent 50% of my revenue. So there is massive fragmentation in mobile in general. The other 1,000 plus devices represent the other 50% of my mobile revenue. We also make a significant amount of money on the iPhone in general. The iOS platform is our biggest moneymaker. But in large part, that was because starting from the summer of last year, we started doing device identification, telling people, hey, if you're on our website, did you know we had an iPhone app? The reason we did that was because for us as a web brand, there's a distribution problem. People get their shiny new toy. They don't necessarily say, hey, is there an app for that? So we needed to let them know. So they take the toy out. They go, I want to go on eBay. They type www.ebay.com, and we let them know, hey, there's actually an app for that. When Apple used to put us on commercials, our revenue would go up 10% that week, and it would stay there. So it's an ongoing challenge. But after we started letting people know, hey, there's an app for that, across our various native platforms, the mobile web now represents somewhere around 25% of mobile revenue. So,
Adam, so where do you see your product strategy going from like 1 year from now? I mean, what are the platforms that you're going to be targeting, and where do you want to invest right now to be 1 year from, where you see this going 1 year from now?
Yeah. Like I said, I think our goal for 2010 was definitely to start getting a native presence on those big 3 kind of smartphone platforms that we see professionals using. I would say that our website today isn't optimized for the mobile web the way that it should be. We have an older WAP site that actually does fairly well globally, but it doesn't take advantage of the modern browsers out there. And so the mobile web is definitely going to be big for us in the coming year. We're also looking, once again, across ubiquity in general. Platforms that are big globally may not be as big in North America or Europe. We have a number of partnerships with different providers. What we're finding is that, not surprisingly, most device makers as well as service providers really want to cater to the professional market. Obviously, LinkedIn can be a big part of that. So we'll be pursuing a lot of partnerships through 2011 to make sure that if you buy a device as a professional, you have a great LinkedIn experience that's designed and works well for that device.
Next topic is portability frameworks, which I didn't really touch on in my speech, but at PayPal we've also been looking at some of these portability frameworks like Appcelerator and PhoneGap. So my question's for Scott, and kind of give our experience with some of the portability frameworks that we've been looking at.
We've at PayPal we've started investigating some of these portability frameworks. In particular, we're looking at Appcelerator. It is a nice way to achieve a broad near-native experience across a variety of platforms while investing in a single code base. When you're developing natively for iPhone and Android, you are doing a lot of duplication of development effort, especially when you're considering fragmentation across the platform on the Android side. By utilizing a portability framework like Appcelerator, and there's a few others, PhoneGap, things like that, you can get near-native performance and appearance fairly easily.
So what are the kind of the different mechanisms that are used in these portability frameworks? I mean, what are the language that you're using and kind of the runtime environment?
So Appcelerator and PhoneGap are the ones that I'm most familiar with, and they're both based on JavaScript. So Appcelerator has essentially a SDK that gives replicates the sort of functionality you find in the Android and iPhone SDKs in JavaScript. PhoneGap allows you to develop using standard web technologies, CSS, HTML, and JavaScript, and in addition provides access to the native hardware functionality that you can't get using just standalone web technologies. So the big one, I guess, the big platform that everybody loves talking about is iPhone. So, Han, can you tell me what you see as kind of the big key advantages beyond discoverability, which I mean everybody knows kind of the app stores does a fantastic job, and you guys had an extra bump by getting featured in their commercials. So discoverability for eBay is no problem. But so beyond that, what advantages do you see on developing for the iPhone?
So the biggest advantage of developing on the iPhone is homogeneity. That's somewhat obvious, but it's further bolstered by the fact that the way the iPhone presents the App Store is actually very critical. When you push an app, taking a step back, native application development harkens back to old school client-server development. If I push an app out, I can't take it back. If I have a production problem, it's a real risk vector for me. I need to have some confidence that users, when they get the initial version of my application, they're going to be able to upgrade. So not only do I have device homogeneity, I also have relatively high confidence that when I push a new version, users will actually upgrade their app. From what I see, every time I push an upgrade, I usually get close to 100% upgrades over the course of a month. And it pretty much operates in almost a half-life-like fashion. So the first day that I push the update, about half the users will get it, and then the next day, another half will get it. And that's a huge advantage, because now I know that my users have the latest software. iOS is expanding now. Apple has the iPad product. There's some conjecture that they're going to be on the television. So that also affords me some advantage in the future, where I can effectively factor my code into a common layer so that I can go after these other platforms in a very aggressive way.
I'll just add to that. We see the same similar metrics on distribution. It's actually really phenomenal if you think about the history of software and client software. That's not a normal number to see that kind of percentage upgrade and engagement. It's not unusual for us to see about half of our installed base upgrade to the latest version within 24 hours. So that's not to be understated. I handle the product side at LinkedIn, and so I can also tell you that there's a basic fact that for almost everyone who puts in the effort, if you're a web property and you roll out a native iOS application, you see your metrics go up. That may not be true forever. Right now it's definitely true, and that is a big incentive for developers to actually put in that extra effort and find a way to get a native presence out there. And I think whether it's the distribution or the fact that iOS users are preconditioned to seek out applications and install them and click on them, maybe it's a selection bias in the type of people who buy iOS devices, but something is going on there that adds up to numbers actually moving, which is what I actually think all the mobile platforms should aspire to for developers, is knowing that if you put in the effort to support that platform, you will see your numbers move as a business.
So iPhone's great, but there's challenges. So what's your experience and what you can share with us in terms of the challenges that you've encountered with iPhone development, whether it's technical or just even in dealing with the kind of the terms of service or what have you? So what can you kind of let the developers know about, like where their landmines may be in front of them?
I think Han hit the nail on the head that actually, especially for web companies, LinkedIn's a web company. Like we're born a Web 2.0 company. We think that way. We operate that way. And so there is a part of kind of your old-fashioned 90s client software thinking that has to get reinstituted to really manage your risk and release process well for iPhone software. Yes, we have the benefit of being a fairly big brand. I think we've never had problems getting through the App Store review process in a timely fashion. But it's not instantaneous, right? Like if I have a critical bug fix on the website and it really is critical, I can measure that response time at LinkedIn in minutes. That's not going to be true. And even if 50% of your members update within a day of release, once you do get it released, that's not 100%, and it depends on the criticality of the error. So how you QA your product is important. Coding defensively and your architecture. We put a little bit more thought ahead of time into architecture, to be honest, because it's not so easy to swap out client-side components. We do have borrowed from the web a more frequent release process. We're trying to release our iPhone app every 6 weeks. But I'd say the biggest challenge is that old DNA of understanding that you can't just push a fix every day, that there's a real cost in the cycle of QA that goes with client development.
So I want to leave some time for our audience to actually ask some questions. So if you have any questions, go ahead and raise your hand, and I guess we'll call you out. I think like right there.
I just wanted to ask a little bit more about the fragmentation on Android. And if you're small, like you guys obviously have big developer teams, you have QA, you probably can buy all the phones and do QA cycles on it. Do you foresee that smaller companies are going to be able to actually go through that cycle for Android, or do you see it getting better or worse, and do you think that's an impediment to actually that platform stealing away mindshare from iOS?
I'll take it first. I can hand off. Well, first of all, we're actually not that big. We're still in the startup plan, although we are hiring Android developers. iOS is good. We actually have a single developer working on Android now, although we do have open positions. We haven't been hit by the fragmentation too badly, but that's only because our professional audience definitely skews heavily towards a smaller number of Android devices. I do expect that the problem is going to get bigger next year, and I'm not sure fundamentally how to deal with it, whether it's going to be portability frameworks, as previously discussed, or whether you have to be brutal about getting your product to work well and be highly engaging and highly successful from a revenue perspective, and then branching out and solving that problem over time. Actually, you guys may want to comment on it.
Yeah, I don't think there's any silver bullet for this problem, and I think that it is going to get worse over time. And the way to approach it, QAing with a wide variety of devices, picking a few key devices in the markets that you want to target, possibly using portability frameworks or even using web technologies instead of native on Android. These are all possibilities for how to address it, but it is a problem that doesn't have a clear, easy solution that I can see.
I'd like to take a different tact in terms of answering this question and simply state that there is a fragmentation issue, and it's important to realize what that could potentially mean for the marketplace itself. Today, if you have fragmentation to some degree, you're going to develop to the lowest common denominator, and that is potentially a threat to the Android marketplace. If you don't have great apps in the Android marketplace, the marketplace may not take off. So even if you build a fantastic app, if everybody else is not building fantastic apps, if the apps in the Android marketplace continue to be inferior to those in the iOS marketplace, you're not going to get a particularly compelling marketplace. And so down the road, that may actually impact your native app strategy. However, to the extent that the marketplace is not functional, if you happen to have a web brand, you could rest assured that at least you better have a good web presence that hopefully can degrade not only to Android but all the other devices as well. So in addition to all of the mitigation strategies that my peers have talked about, I can't stress enough that you do need a web presence in case the Android marketplace fails to take off in the next couple of years.
Next question.
You talked about AppBacker, I think it was, and some of those other platforms that folks that are more familiar with JavaScript and so on might be able to use. So what would be your suggestion, at least initially, for folks who are more privy to being in that environment, who do want to transition over? What would you say that they should keep in mind as they make that transition, and what sort of obstacles should they expect to run into because they're not natively writing it in Objective-C, for instance?
So on the portability frameworks and things like PhoneGap, you can expect that there are some native hardware technologies that are going to be a little bit harder to access in some cases, and the portability frameworks may not track 100% to the latest releases. Appcelerator has been very good at being responsive to releasing iOS upgrades for their framework as those come out of Apple, but they're always going to lag at least a little bit, so that's certainly a challenge there. But I think for a lot of smaller developers who are already familiar with web technologies, I think that these sort of options provide a really good opportunity to have an app that you can put in the App Store that uses technologies that you're already familiar with and give you a lot of really good functionality. I don't know if that addresses your question, but...
Next question.
A little bit along the lines of the first question. What are strategies that you employ to make sure that the look, touch, and feel of your apps, both in Android and iPhone, tend to have the same feel for the end user?
So I'm probably the wrong person to ask because I don't think they should look the same. Our WinPhone 7 application has a very WinPhone 7 look and feel. Our Android app is being rewritten. You'll see one next year, and hopefully it'll have a user interface that is a lot more compelling for Android users, and we're also redoing our iPhone app in the fall. Our iPad app happens to be black, which is rather blasphemous when you think about eBay core colors. And we do that because we want to make sure that the users feel comfortable with their device using our app, and they want to be engaged. And towards that end, we spend a lot of time in our group figuring out what does an Android user really want out of their app? What are they used to in terms of user interaction models? And we pay less attention to in terms of whether or not things actually look the same. Because if you have, say, a very iPhone-y springboard, that may not make any sense to somebody on WinPhone. And we're cognizant of that at eBay. That's just our philosophy. A different brand may choose a different tact.
Like PayPal. At PayPal, we've decided to go with an approach where we have an immersive PayPal branded experience that's fairly consistent across the platforms that we support, to the extent that we can manage that, with some adaptations to support the specifics of each platform. So if you look at our Android application and our iPhone application, they have the PayPal look and feel, but we still support the back button and menu and things like that on the Android platform, because that's what a user will expect on that platform. So we've gone a slightly different route than what eBay's done.
I'm kind of familiar with this role. I've spent several years being the tiebreaker between eBay and PayPal. We actually have a similar philosophy, it sounds like, to eBay, which is I really believe that the explosion we're seeing in mobile devices, operating systems, interfaces is not an accident. Mobile devices are very personal devices. People carry them around with them, they interoperate them, they feel more personal based on the data in them, and they make choices. Right? They don't feel locked in. I'm a big believer that people who pick an Android phone could have bought an iPhone, but they picked an Android phone. Why? What are they looking for? What do they brag about to their friends that their Android phone can do that their iPhone can't? Vice versa. People who buy iPhones absolutely could buy another phone. Why do they buy the iPhone? What do they want to do? Blackberries. There are huge audience of people who love their Blackberries. Why do they love their Blackberries? What do they do on them? How do they use them? So we actually try to answer those questions when we design our apps. My goal for LinkedIn mobile apps, which is obviously aspirational, is I would love the LinkedIn app to be one of the apps that someone demos when they have their new mobile device and goes, look how cool my new phone is, look what LinkedIn does, look how good the LinkedIn experience is here. And vice versa, I want them to feel great about LinkedIn because they see that experience and they're like, wow, LinkedIn gets it. This is fantastic. So it's really a win-win for the device and the brand. But what it means is I don't think you'll ever confuse our interfaces across the three. And that also even extends to functionality. We have features on the iPhone that we won't have on BlackBerry. We have features on the BlackBerry that we won't have on the iPhone. And the same thing for Android. We'll have features there because each platform enables different capabilities as well as expectations of what happens.
Next question.
So my question is mobile web versus native apps. I mean, what do you guys see over the next year or so when we're going to get a lot more bandwidth on mobile devices? Will the mobile web eclipse these guys based on the specification, or because of the specification it wouldn't ever be as rich as native apps? I mean, what's your thinking? What will happen in the next 1 year, year and a half?
I think Han actually already covered a piece of this, which is the mobile web is immensely important for no other reason than that there's massive fragmentation across the world in terms of devices and capabilities. And building native applications doesn't scale that way. You're not going to be able to support hundreds of native platforms, or even, frankly, dozens. It's a lot of work and manpower to support even half a dozen native platforms, let alone a broad width. I think that the mobile web, in a funny way, has some of the same problems that the web did, which is around distribution, right? So now you're a great mobile web presence, but how are people getting to your site, right? For regular websites, go back to traditional web, most people's traffic comes from 4 sources. There's organic traffic, people just punch you in. There's email-driven volume. There's SEO. And there's search engine marketing. Those are typically the 4 dominant traffic sources to any consumer web property. How do all those work on the mobile web? I think if you think about it, some of those loops don't work on the mobile web yet. Some of them do. Email works fantastically well with browser detect and links. You can do a very good job of that, and people are. Not sure how SEO or SEM work well for the mobile web. And then, of course, organic traffic, I think native apps actually compete with the mobile web, with right now native apps seeming to have the leg up. But I think the answer to the mobile web really lies in if we solve that engagement problem, if it turns out that things like Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, social distribution become dominant ways that web links get shared and activity happens, well, then the mobile web looks incredibly strong because it will have this incredible traffic source that keeps bringing people back to your property.
So on that specific question, I'm not quite sure if it's all that important, to be honest. And the reason is because If I want to get into any app store today, I can do it if I have a mobile website, because I can just build a little wrapper app and put it there, and voila, somebody is downloading something, and yet they can do something on my website. There are a couple of advantages to this. Why do you want a native app to begin with? You can take advantage of the frameworks and potentially create a more compelling experience, but you can do a lot of things with HTML5 and CSS3. There is something that the native apps can do that the mobile web can't. There are a couple of things. First of all, they take advantage of sensors, the microphone, the camera. You could have some specific use cases that take advantage of these sensors that could be very compelling. You can imagine, say, like a Facebook app. You can like a bunch of things today. Maybe if they happen to have built an app that allows you to like something by listening to music or taking a picture, totally within their realm, you can't do that with the mobile web. So you may have certain use cases that need a native app. You can mitigate some of those use cases through a wrapper app. Notifications is an often underestimated capability of native apps. With notifications, the implication is that your customer is already opt in. Think about that power. A lot of people pay Google so that their customers can spend money on their website. If you have a user that's opt in and you can notify them out of whim, you can merch them things, you can send them coupons, you can let them know that something has happened to their presence, and that's powerful, and that is a native-only capability. But again, you can mitigate that if you just create a little wrapper around your mobile website. So I think the strategy is really cover your bases with the mobile web, and then take a look at the dominant platforms that are clearly winners, and then invest judiciously in those native platforms.
So I think we're running out of time. So let's actually just wrap up with one final question, like parting words of wisdom for our developers that are out here. If there's going to be one kind of a tidbit that you could kind of share and say, you know, this, you follow this rule, this is something that'll be true and kind of stay true, what would that be?
I'm sure that everyone in the audience already agrees with this statement, but I'll say it anyway because it needs to be said. Be prepared that within the next very small number of years, next 3 years, that most of your engagement and activity will come through mobile devices. I don't think that's controversial. Everyone sees it in their numbers. But that's a big deal. That means that when you're building things out right now and figuring out how these loops work, getting that experience right and reaching out, these are going to become the dominant problems within just a matter of years, let alone growth drivers, whether it's a new business or an existing one. We spend a lot of time on it at LinkedIn for that reason. But really, it harkens for me back to the 90s when people were debating how much to put into their web properties versus their more traditional software. It's going to be that extreme, and it's going to be much faster than, frankly, even the web taking off. So probably obvious, but it needs to be said in every mobile conference.
If I had one piece of advice, I would say be ready for change. I'm sure everyone in here is well aware that the mobile space moves very, very quickly. You know, the mobile landscape of 2 years ago is radically different than what it is today, and I'm sure in 2 years there's going to be things that we can't even guess today. So, yeah, that would be my one piece of advice.
So I'll give everybody here a bit of tactical advice. I joined eBay maybe 16 or 17 months ago, and took over the mobile engineering program at eBay around 15, 14 months ago. The first thing I did had nothing to do with platforms at all. The first thing I did was I created a mobile services organization. And the reason is because if you're going to be in the business of building native applications, you need a very strong services organization to build actual services. Because again, you are building client-server software. If you control the back end, you can push the complexity down to the back end, and you can crank out new experiences very quickly on the front end, regardless of the platform wars. If you don't solve the back end and you focus on the front end, then you're going to be in the business of scraping your site and doing some other nasty things, and you'll find that you will have a very hard time innovating in general.
Well, thank you. So thanks for joining us here, and thank you, the audience, for coming and listening to us. Really appreciate it. So I think that's it. Thanks.